Do you ever wonder what happened to your friends from high school? I mean, you were so close. You laughed together, you cried together, you shared some of the best years of your lives together. And yet, somehow through life, you just lost touch. Now it's time to relive those moments once again. Introducing the podcast that takes you back in time to the place where it all began. This is Class Reunion. We're bringing you all the gossip, secrets, and scandals from your high school days that you won't want to miss. Join us as we catch up with old classmates and dive into the wildest stories from our high school days. From those legendary parties to the infamous cliques, we're spilling all the tea on who's who and what really went down. So grab a seat, turn your volume up, and get ready for a trip down memory lane. Class Reunion, the podcast that reunites us all. Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Class Reunion. I am very humbled to be sharing my next guest with you for a lot of reasons that you're going to learn later, but I want to introduce a wonderful woman named Teresa Wilson Flores. And she is a warrior, a vigilante, and advocate. And we're going to get to her story. But I just want to say thank you so much, Teresa, for being on. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
So we're going to get to a little the calm before the storm. So we're going to reminisce a little bit about what it was like when you were growing up. You mentioned your dad worked at General Electric.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so you moved around a lot. So those young formative years, like where a lot of us went and rode our bikes for candy or did sleepovers, did you have any of that neighborhood-like experience when you were young before you moved to Michigan and when you were 15?
Yeah, but again, it only lasted for 2 years because we moved every 2 years. So
almost like military family.
Yeah, a lot like that. Yeah. So we lived in Indiana mostly, and then we're in southern Indiana, and then moved up to Flushing.
Oh.
And so we're in the country more.
Okay.
But still, did the bike riding and sleepovers and roller skating.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
So you did have all of that, even though it was short-lived. Was it?
Yes.
Did you get in a rhythm of knowing how to make new friends, or was it always difficult every time? Okay.
No, you have to just dive right in. And I learned that pretty fast, especially being a girl. Like, I think it was different for my brothers because of sports and stuff. So, but definitely dove in, but was still kind of, I think, shy in the back row, because I was always the new girl and just waiting for some people to like me and bring them into their group, Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. And do you know, a lot of schools, they did this with us. I don't know if they did this with you, but they always make you stand up in class. Oh, yeah, I always felt so bad. Like, nothing like singling somebody out who's nervous anyway.
Yeah.
And, did you have to do that?
Definitely. Here's the new girl, introduce her to everybody. But luckily my last name was Wilson. So I was at the end of the line. So didn't have to go first on anything. So that was good.
That's true. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah. Yeah. Were you involved in any kind of Girl Scouts or anything? Or Okay.
Yep, I did 4-H because, like I said, we always lived in the country.
Yes.
And did Girl Scouts for a long time. And what else did we do? I rode horses competitively. So things like that. But again, you'd be in a club for 2 years or a year and a half, and then you'd move and have to find a new one. So that wasn't even easy.
Yeah. Oh, but I will say I thought it was so cool, the kids that were in 4-H club.
Yeah.
I always wanted to live on a farm. I didn't want to do any of the work, but I wanted to sit on my porch with lemonade.
Yeah. Homemade lemonade, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a great way to live. What a cool background. What was your musical influence then? Because you weren't close to concert venues per se, I would imagine.
Not at all. Gosh, I didn't go to a concert until I was in college for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah. Just more probably just what we call now the top 40. I really liked a lot of folk type music, the Carpenters, like the Air Supply and Journey, and just, the same thing, play them over and over and over on my record player. So.
I know. And I was just talking about with my last guest, I read the album cover like it was part of
the listening process. Like
Right.
those words were
I
never going
forgot
to
about that.
change, but I would turn
Yeah.
it over. I would look at the,
Yeah.
lyrics. I mean, it was just, I sat in a beanbag chair.
Oh yeah.
And listened to them that way.
Yeah.
Carole King Tapestry was one of my favorite
okay,
albums.
Yeah. That's cool.
And I loved Air Supply. I'm all out of
yes.
love.
Yes.
They sing higher than I can sing.
I love them.
Well, I think it's great that despite all the moving around that you did, it had to mature you in a way that a lot of us were never used to or have had experience.
Sure.
And then you came to Birmingham in 9th grade. We talked about that. We think it was the Berkshire, right? And so you were on the cusp of being that last 9th grade class, because when I went to Groves, you're 83, I'm 84. I went with the 9th graders.
Okay. Yeah.
So I kind of felt like even that much more cool because I wasn't so new.
Well, what stunk for me was I was in the high school in Flushing. So into Flushing High School outside of Flint. And I was in 9th grade and I was in the high school. And then in the middle of the year, we moved to Birmingham. And now all of a sudden I'm back in the junior high. And I'm like, oh, that really stunk.
Oh,
it was horrible. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Oh my gosh. And did your family ever like wonder, like, I mean, I'm sure your dad had a great career that provided you such a nice livelihood, but like, did you ever sit down and talk about like, is this okay? Do you mind us moving? I know it really wasn't your choice, but my gosh.
That's really funny. No, of course we didn't have any like say in it. So. Nope. Yeah.
No family meeting. It's like, pack up, we're going.
Exactly. Yeah.
No. Oh my gosh. Where were your parents originally from?
My mom's from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and my dad was from Akron, Ohio.
Okay. So all those Midwest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's the best.
Yeah, it is.
I know I'll have to talk about your TED Talk, but I noticed you kept saying pop, and I'm now in Florida, so I had to convert to soda.
Oh gosh.
And then there's Texas, which is Coke, regardless.
Yeah.
So those things are funny when I hear them again.
Yeah.
So we're going to move to Groves, and you were there for how many years? Because you graduated in a different high school.
Yeah. Like that 9th grade weird thing. And then 10th grade and 11th grade. So we moved the summer.
Okay, you really were 2 years. Gee.
Yeah. It's always 2 years. Yeah. Yep.
Wow. So where'd you graduate then finally?
So we moved the summer of, what would that be? Like 82, right? Okay. Yeah, 82. Okay. So I had just finished my junior year and we moved to Stratford, Connecticut. And so I went to a high school there for 1 year and graduated. So, so I don't get to go to their like reunions either, because I don't know that many. I was in the band and stuff there, but like, it's just weird for me, this in between land where, I don't remember a lot of people, from Groves, and then I don't really feel connected with people from Bunnell. And so, it's weird.
I would imagine. And, Connecticut had to have been the biggest change because that's its own little world there too, lifestyle wise.
Oh yeah. And like, they don't say pop. To them, I had this Southern accent and, but you know what? I can't complain about it because it was so beautiful. And it was like, got me far, far away from Michigan. And so it was like my little redemption time. So I loved it.
That's probably very true. We're going to talk about that, but that's really, it wouldn't have benefited if you went from Birmingham to Flint anyway. You'd still be in this in a state that you didn't want to be in.
Yeah.
And did you go to college?
I did. Because I had taken like my SATs when I was at Groves and stuff. And obviously I did so poorly because of everything that was going on. Once I moved to Connecticut, my grades took off and I did great. But because my SAT scores were so low, it was really hard to get into college. Yeah. And so I found one college in Connecticut that accepted me on probation. And then I just excelled. And then my parents moved again. And so I moved to Indiana after 2 years of college there, and then finished off in Indiana at Ball State.
Oh, yeah. So. Okay. Ball State. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I relate to the final year because my son we moved from Michigan to Florida. And when he was in 9th grade, but in Florida, it's so transient. So there is no, like, it wasn't even like he was coming into friends that had been there forever. Everyone was strangers.
Yeah.
Everyone was moving from New York or, coming in. So, he has good friends now, but it was weird for me at the time because it was like the connections were so strange because everybody was coming in for their first time, down to Florida. And
I like that though, because it kind of makes it clears the ground. Like
it does. There's no cliques.
There's so many, there's no cliques. You got the girls that know each other since, kindergarten and I never had that. So I think that'd be better.
Hey, sorry for the interruption, but I need to say, attention all alumni. Are you ready to relive the glory days and reunite with your classmates? Look no further than myevent.com, the ultimate destination for planning unforgettable class reunions. With myevent.com, you're in control. Upload photos, upload event details, and connect with your classmates. Spread the word on social media and watch the excitement grow. myevent.com brings your past, present, and future together in one unforgettable event. Start planning your class reunion now. myevent.com. Your reunion, your way. All right, let's get back to the show.
Well, we're going to, do you have any water by you or anything? We're going to take a sip and just get ready here, girl. So I already am in love with Teresa for a lot of reasons, but her strength and her willingness to have this open forum on the podcast is something that I know I will remember for forever. So I did know Teresa's story. She is an advocate and a speaker, like I mentioned, and I had been trying to find her. So that's why it's interesting we're using Teresa Wilson, because I only know her online as Teresa Flores. And am I saying that correctly?
Yep.
Okay. Because it's fancy. Where I began my research with you was a TED Talk that I will leave on at least Facebook for sure and any other social media that takes a link. But in 2011, you did a TED Talk. And I knew the story, but it helped me get to know you as a person and answered some questions that I was kind of thinking about anyway. And one of the things, I'm going to let you share your story, but one of the things that you did answer right away was this lifestyle of moving around every 2 years. And so my first thing was like, how come you didn't have anybody to help and support you? And so knowing right away that you said you moved every 2 years, number one, that broke my heart because, I would have wanted somebody to be your savior to think of a better word. It makes sense that that's also an appropriate target.
Right. Absolutely. That's what made me vulnerable.
Correct. And so then it all made sense. It was like, okay, that storyline fits in perfectly of why you were suited for what happened. So I just think the TED Talk is a really good way to kind of start the story.
Sure.
If you're okay with that.
Yeah.
And how did that even come about? Like, did you reach out to them with your story? And
no, they found me. It's been amazing, Leanne, since I started this. And I had just turned 40 and it just all clicked that what happened to me was called human trafficking. I went to a conference and I never knew a word, a term to use for what happened back then. And at that moment, I was like, I need to raise awareness because I have children that are the same age as I was when it first started. And so I just started, sharing my story and things just came to me like, oh, we'd like you to do this. We'd like you to do that. What about writing a book? I was like, oh my gosh, so I really sought out opportunities. They came and found me, which to me is a God thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So we grew up in a very privileged school system, I think.
Yes, we did. Yeah, absolutely.
And the whole part about human trafficking is how can that possibly happen in an area like ours?
Yeah.
And it can, number one. And number two, I've always felt this way when you are in an automotive industry and you have a lot of senior executives and you have a lot of parties that people aren't even aware of.
Yeah.
And so while we admire that part of Detroit's history, it's thick with lies and deception and stories that none of us, there's a darkness to that lifestyle that nobody knows. But yours was student to student specific.
Right.
And do you want to talk about the crush and start there?
Sure.
because we've all had it and we've all been there.
One of the things that I found interesting about Groves was that it was very diverse. I assume that it's still that way today. I don't know. First time I've been around Jewish kids and Chaldeans and, and getting offered like the Jewish holidays. We used to have school holidays on those, the Jewish holidays. Like, what is this? So I loved it. I just thought it was the first time I'd ever been exposed to, I called it like the fast pace because I'd always lived in the country. So, and I'd always been the richest kid. So now all of a sudden I'm not the richest because it's like you said, everybody's just about as privileged that go there. So, so keeping up with the Joneses and wanting everything that all the other girls had was kind of tough. So got a crush on this one guy who was very different. I wasn't, like I said, used to some of these different cultures. And the clique that I was in, I call it the B clique. We weren't the popular girls, but we were like kind of the next level down. They were just like, you probably don't want to be with this guy. And which of course made me want him even more.
I mean, I know as a young when you're that young, it's so stupid, but it's what we do, Yeah.
And my parents were really strict. So Irish Catholic, I'm the only girl. Couldn't date until I was 16 and that I had to have my driver's license and just, all these requirements. And so 6 months, we just talked to each other. He worked in the student store there selling pencils and erasers and was in a couple classes of mine. So he was the same grade as I was, but I think that he was maybe a year or two older. And then two of his cousins also were a year ahead of us and they were there as well. So, and then they went to church at the same church, St. Ives as well. So it was, my sophomore year of school now, February, I was on the track team at Groves and we were practicing in the gym and I needed to get something from my locker. And I ran to my locker and he was standing by it and just said, "Hey, would you like a ride home from school?" And so, I'm pretty naive and, and so
it's
excited.
A boy.
It's a boy. It's a cute boy. And so we went out to his car. I'm like, sure, ditch track practice. Yeah. and it's not a date, right? Like, so he had a Trans Am. I remember that distinctly. And he turned onto 13 Mile out of school. Right. But I live left. And so he was like, "Oh, I just need to go home and grab something." And that's how it all started, with him not taking me home from school, me being very naive and really stupid, actually. So,
and well, no, but I understand how you feel that way. But it's we talked about this even before we got started, which is part of the reason why I want to talk about this was not only did it happen, but it was at a time frame in our lives of our generation where you just shut up about everything.
Absolutely.
So I can beat myself up about some of the decisions I made, but your toolbox is so low. You don't have it.
There was no such thing as date rape. There was no like prosecuting and bullying, all of that. There was nothing like that then. Nothing.
And also going to you not being the richest, part of the intrigue was also he pulls up to this house.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, this is 10 times bigger than even my house. And I thought my house was big.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So all of that was set up for some tragedy that we're going to talk about, but understand where your mindset was at that age,
Yeah.
Most definitely. So, and the other thing I want to talk about, you were drugged on that first day with him. And that's another thing that wasn't, now you can talk about, be careful not to have your drink spiked and look out for your bartenders, and all that stuff is now available. It still happens, unfortunately.
Right.
But that's a common safety measure that a lot of us women talk about at the bar.
Right.
That was nothing that any of us knew about. So the feeling, can you walk me through on like when you knew you started to feel woozy or what was going on?
Yeah. So he invited me in the house and, at the time I was like, no, I shouldn't do this. And, again, just mesmerized by this guy. And he's like, "Oh, it's okay. I just want to get to know you." And again, thinking, the best in everybody. It's like, it's okay. And so I went in and he showed me around the house. He just said, let me show you my room. And then he had like a little mini fridge in his room, which I kind of thought was weird, but gave me a pop and sat on the bed. And, he just started talking to me, started kissing. And then I felt really woozy, like really, really dizzy, and wasn't able to really, like, as long as the room was spinning around and around. Yeah. He kept coming on to me, and I kept saying, no, pushing him off, and didn't really have much control. And so, that led to me getting raped that day.
And how long were you there? And I'm asking because I don't know the length and strength of these drugs. So
yeah.
Were you coming to in a couple of hours, or were you?
I don't think that it was a few hours, so it's hard to remember,
right.
But I would think it was at least an hour. Yeah, I think that it was at least an hour, because then I remember starting to hear voices and people downstairs and freaking out, and then he ended up sneaking me out of the house basically and taking me back home.
Okay. So you go back home not knowing how to feel for a variety of reasons. You're 15 and this horrific situation just occurred and your mind is spinning. The next day you were handed an envelope.
Right. Yep. And it was full of pictures that he had taken, not he had taken, but I found out later, his two cousins who went to school with us had taken while this was happening. And they said, he's like, I'm really sorry. I didn't know this was going to happen, but they want you to earn them back. And I was so naive again. I was like, do their homework, wash their car. I didn't know what he meant. Right. And really and he said, they know where your dad works. They know, the address of his office. They're going to show them to his boss. They're going to post them around school. They're going to show them to the priest. I was in the youth choir at church. And so I was like, whoa, there's no way. So I basically agreed to do whatever, but I had no idea really what they meant.
And so just to repeat that, earning back meant to get those photos back in your possession and not be used against you. You were going to
do whatever they said.
And you do have a father that I don't know your full relationship, but he's a high level executive.
High level, yes.
And you just knew your world would crash.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And your brothers, your safety. I mean, when you talk about, I was being dumb, that is the most heart-wrenching part where you felt so threatened. And there should be nothing in that storyline that you should look back and say, I woulda, shoulda, coulda, because what you were doing was saving everyone else.
I was protecting them. Yeah. I've come to terms with that. I don't know if I was stuck in that kind of a situation again, would I make the same mistake? Would I do the same thing? And I can't see how I would have changed that. I would have wanted people around me to help me, but I probably would have made the same decision. I don't know. It's one of those things.
And that's where I also want to explore it too, because as much as we've progressed, that storyline is still very, very familiar with young girls, which is where your advocacy comes in. I want to talk about. But so when you say, would I have done it differently? It's still so hard for women to get themselves out of those situations because there's so much shame and things like that involved.
Exactly.
So now you're stuck in a cycle and it proceeds to be where you are having to leave in the middle of the night.
Yep.
And meet in a street corner in the neighborhood.
Yep.
And be picked up for other services with people.
Correct. Yeah. They would call we had a kids line and a parents line.
Oh, you were fancy. Oh,
we were. Yeah.
We had call waiting. That was about it.
Oh gosh. No, they got tired of all of our phone calls. So they're like, okay. So they would call and usually around midnight and say, meet me outside. And so I would sneak out my back door, go through the neighbor's backyard and wait, in our cul-de-sac for that Trans Am. And then they would
You must hate that car.
Yeah, I do, actually. And I would go places that I had no idea where I was. So it's not like we didn't go to hotels, and we were all around, Rochester Hills, Farmington Hills. I never knew where I was. So, and end up being there for several hours, being abused and just horrific things happening, and then taken home around 3 or 4, and I'd sneak back inside and go to sleep and then go to school the next day.
And so your grades, everything everything
Gosh.
about you had to continually shrink.
Yes,
You
it
know,
did.
your voice, your school, your
Yep.
academics. Yeah.
Yeah. And even, just that feeling of nobody's not, I don't say on my side, but nobody's there for me, like wanting that, knight in shining armor to come and rescue me. I remember one time, the cousins, I'll call them, I didn't answer the phone one night, and they came up to me. Nobody was in the hall except for there was a security guard and sitting on a stool, and they came up and shoved me against the locker and spit in my face and were like, don't ever not answer again. And the security guard did nothing. Like he saw everything and didn't do anything. And I'm like, wow, like I really am on my own on this.
Teresa, I didn't know that. And that goes to where my mind was even in the TED Talk, was like, who's protecting her? Who's her friend that's her confidant? But my gosh, that just adds a layer of like, you were alone.
Oh yeah. Do you remember in my book, there's something that happened where I was starting to go into my last class of the day, which was typing. And the cousins came again and said, hey, we need to speak to you. And the bell's about ready to ring. The teacher's standing there with, outside the door. And she's like, come on, Teresa, get in class. And they're like, she'll be there when we're finished with her. And she was like, oh, okay. And she went in and she shut the door and she left me out there with them. And I was like, wow, like just again, another, I don't want to say betrayal, but just let down of, here she could have stuck up for me and nope.
It was silent back then. It
really was.
It really, really was. And I was sharing with actually my editor for this podcast that I was going to be speaking to you, and he goes, oh yeah, that this happened at our school too. I'm blown away.
Wow.
On how this is under everybody's nose. It's just, anyway.
I think in the affluent areas.
Yes.
They ran
worse. The show.
It's even worse because because of the shame is even higher. No one's talking about it. So I think there's just tons of cases like mine, in that whole area of Detroit, suburban Detroit.
Absolutely. And that's why I said, it's like, I remember some of my podcasts, I talked about my mom always wanting me to find some executive from the, motor from one of the big three and all of that. And the friends that I did have whose parents were part of that community, I don't want to throw anybody into the bus, but there was definitely affairs were part of the contract, right? And so you get that lifestyle, and that's just comes with the territory if they're, in Japan. And I think my dad went to a hot bathhouse more times than he wants to admit, but you know what I mean? It's just, money talks.
The customers and the late night, the martini lunches and the affairs.
It's not just Hollywood.
My family, it was exactly the same thing too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I want to get to them, but, so when you were having these, and they do increase, and I do want to talk about the Detroit event because that one is the one I'm probably going to start crying. But how did you hide physically what was happening to you?
Good question. It really wasn't hard. I know. It wasn't hard. You wear a long sleeve. They were very meticulous about like any kind of abuse would be in places that people wouldn't see. And really they didn't need to do too much to me physically because I was so scared. Like I was terrified. The phone would ring and there would be nobody on the other end. And I knew it was them, walking home with my brother from school because he was in 9th grade when I was there, and them stopping, a car and saying things. And I worked at Burger King there on Southfield and 13 Mile, and they would come in. So they really didn't have to physically hurt me.
Mind games as much as
great like terrorist activity types.
Okay, so this is super personal.
That's okay.
It just came to me, so I wasn't even planning on this, but we all have our time of the month and things like that. Were you able to get out of those situations based on?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why that was coming across.
That's a good. I was always able to, I'm sorry, on my period,
right.
And,
can't participate in gym class.
So, that got, I got away with it a few times, but Yeah. And it wasn't every day either. Like it was several times a week.
Okay.
And then I remember the first summer they weren't around. And so they had gone, to another country. And so I had some
You probably
reprieve
thought it was
that summer.
over at that point.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And then they came back and, what is it? Junior year starts and it starts all back over again. So, yeah.
So the height of the worst story, only because it's shared on TED Talk, but I don't know if there's one even worse than what you shared.
That's the worst one.
Okay. Was also your movement to create a soap project. So this had been going on for how long before there was an incident that was the straw that just, broke you and made you want to create change with what was happening? Were you a year and a half in it at this point, or?
I think so. Yeah. It's hard. The timeline is super hard.
Well, you're blocking so much of this trauma.
Yeah. But I think it was about a year and a half in. Yeah. It was towards the end.
Okay. And in this particular incident, and again, you have to go back to this TED Talk. Teresa does. I don't know how she finds the strength, but she does an excellent job of sharing her story. Thanks. But this in particular event was to a CDS hotel in Detroit. Yeah. And I love the way you described it. You said it was an L shape, which we've all been there, with the doors on the outside, and it's probably rented by the hour. Yeah. And would you say this was the first time that you were put in that type of environment?
Okay. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Never been to a motel in my life. So,
and they began to auction you off.
Yeah. It was 20 men about in that little tiny motel room where, just crowded in there. And I was the only girl, only female. I was 17, I think. And they were like, everybody worked for them in some capacity and said, this is, something that we're offering to you all as a thank you for your hard work. And the auctioning started. And I was drugged at that time too. Usually, I was very fortunate. There weren't a lot of drugging of me. So that was good because now that's more common. But that night I was drugged and it was.
And also beaten.
Yeah. I mean, just they get to do whatever they want. So they own you.
And you talk about the time period, because we talk about, cell phones and maps and things at that time. You were without clothing, I believe you said, or
and they took my clothes.
And you don't know where you are. There's no GPS. There's no. So how did you get out of that situation ultimately?
So I found my pajamas because I had snuck out of my house in my pajamas, as I usually did, because I think I'm thinking, well, if my parents see me at home coming in or going out, like they're gonna be like, oh, I was just up for a glass of water, So I found my pajamas. They were in the bathtub of the motel, and then they were soaking wet. So I put on these wet pajamas. I didn't have any shoes on because I had snuck out without shoes, and I didn't have any identification on me. I didn't have any money on me. And like you said, I didn't know where I was. And after going through something so traumatic as that too, I was like, what am I going to do?
And you're a white woman in a downtown area.
Yeah. I think cause I've done a lot of work in those areas now. I think it's probably was Redford Township or something.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I noticed there was a little, diner attached to the motel. And I
always a 24/7 diner.
Absolutely. Walked in, so typical, the orange vinyl, waiting room with and then the payphone. And I just stood there. I didn't even do I call my parents, but then they'll know I'm not home. And I just, so the waitress that was there noticed me and she's like, can I help you? And I was like, no, I'm fine. It's what am I going to say? And so then I asked her, can I have a dime? Because I was going to try and call my parents. And because I really was stuck. And so I put the dime in. That tells you how long ago.
I know. I was like, a dime.
It was a dime. And I hear my dad pick up the phone and he's sound asleep. And I'm like, I can't do it. And I hung it up. I just couldn't disappoint them. I couldn't. I don't know.
And there's no caller ID.
No. It's a payphone. So then I hung it up and oh my God, I still feel that feeling of I can't disappoint them. I can't. And so I stood there, and then and the waitress called the police, and they brought me home that morning. So, regardless,
Now,
they still, found
did
out. But
did parents see the police car drop you off, or?
oh yeah, he came in. So yeah, when we pulled up, I remember thinking like, I'm just gonna say like, oh, thank you, nice Mr. Policeman, and I'm gonna go around the back of the house where the sliding glass door is still open, and I'm gonna sneak back in, and everything will be okay. But he stuck around, and my parents answered the door in their robes, and they were not happy.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Class Reunion with Teresa Wilson Flores. We hope you'll join us as we continue her story next Wednesday. Thank you.